This is Sleepless Sapiens, the channel that turns forgotten history into stories you cannot turn away from. If you like long-form, softly narrated stories that lay in the heart of sleepcore, give us a like and subscribe. It really helps. And tell me, where are you watching from? It's always fascinating to see where everyone is from, gathering in every video. Tonight we go further back than fire itself. Stay with me. You won't want to miss this. Imagine this. For most of human existence, nights were not peaceful. They were dangerous. Before fire, nightfall was a line you did not cross lightly. Once the sun disappeared, survival meant silence, stillness, and fear. Archaeologists know this from the places our ancestors chose to live. Without the security of light, early humans stayed close to caves, cliffs, and areas where they could hide quickly. Evidence from sites in Africa and Eurasia shows bones piled in dark shelters, proof that people gathered together at night for safety. There was no hearth in the centre, no glowing flames, just bodies pressed tightly, trying to share warmth. Without fire, there was no way to control temperature. Nights in the Pleistocene could drop to freezing, even in regions that today feel warm. Children and the elderly often suffered most. Survival depended on staying close, on using animal skins and each other's bodies as insulation. Food was another problem. Raw meat is hard to chew and harder to digest. Without cooking, calories were limited. Scientists studying the teeth and jaws of early humans can see the evidence. Stronger jaws, larger teeth, and worn enamel, all signs of a raw diet. But this diet came with risks. Bacteria, parasites, and foodborne diseases were constant threats. Predators ruled the night. Lions, hyenas, leopards, they hunted in darkness. Early humans had only stone tools, no flames to scare animals away. When darkness came, the landscape belonged to others, and humans became prey. Imagine lying awake, listening to the sound of paws moving in the brush, or the distant growl of something that saw better than you ever could. And yet, this was normal. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans lived in this world, a world where every night was an enemy, and every sunrise was a victory. What changed everything, what turned the night from terror into opportunity, was fire. But before that discovery, life was shaped entirely by its absence. The world our ancestors knew was not like the one you see today. For most of human prehistory, the Earth was locked in the Pleistocene epoch, a time that began about 2.6 million years ago and lasted until roughly 11,700 years ago. It was an age defined by instability, by cycles of crushing cold and brief warmer intervals, by a planet that tested every species' ability to adapt. Glaciers dominated the northern continents. Enormous ice sheets, sometimes more than 3 kilometers thick, covered vast regions of North America, Europe, and Asia. They advanced and retreated over thousands of years, reshaping entire landscapes. When ice advanced, sea levels dropped dramatically, exposing land bridges between continents, the same land bridges that allowed early humans to spread far beyond Africa. But when the ice melted, seas rose, drowning coastlines and isolating populations. For early humans, this climate was not background scenery. It was a daily battle. In glacial periods, temperatures could fall to extremes that made nights lethal without protection. Even in warmer interglacial phases, sudden shifts could bring droughts, storms, or bitter freezes. Fossil pollen and ice core samples tell us that vegetation zones shifted constantly, forcing humans to move with the animals they hunted and the plants they gathered. This was a world of giants. The mammoth and the woolly rhinoceros roamed the tundra. Enormous cave bears and saber-toothed cats ruled the forests. To survive, humans had to compete not just with the climate, but with predators that were larger, stronger, and better adapted to cold. And unlike today, there was no fire to soften the edge of this environment. No warmth at night, no controlled light in the dark, no flames to keep predators away. Survival was entirely about endurance, wrapping yourself in skins, huddling in caves, and hoping the storm would pass. This was the stage on which humanity existed for hundreds of thousands of years, a planet constantly shifting, sometimes hostile, sometimes generous, but always unpredictable. To live in the Pleistocene meant to live with uncertainty as the only certainty. When the sun dropped below the horizon in the Pleistocene, humans had to decide quickly where to spend the night. Without fire, shelter was not a matter of comfort, it was survival. Archaeological evidence shows that caves were among the most valuable refuges. They offered natural walls against the cold and protection from predators. Excavations at sites like Jokudian in China and Swartkrans in South Africa reveal layers of human occupation stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. But caves were never entirely safe. They were often shared with animals, bears, hyenas, or leopards. For humans, moving into a cave meant taking the risk of confrontation with creatures much stronger than themselves. Not every group had access to caves, and many landscapes offered none at all. In those regions, people turned to rock overhangs, cliff sides, or even hollow trees. These provided minimal protection, but could at least shield against wind and rain. Archaeologists studying wear patterns on stone tools and animal bones often find them clustered near such natural shelters, suggesting they were used as temporary camps. When there was no natural refuge, early humans built simple structures from what they had: branches, stones, and animal hides. These were not houses in any modern sense, but windbreaks, lean-tos, or low huts that could block the elements. Traces of such campsites, circles of stones, post holes, or clusters of tools, appear in Africa and Eurasia, marking the footprints of fragile dwellings long gone. At night, these shelters became more than places to rest. They were barriers against a world that came alive in darkness. Without fire, there was no way to seal an entrance, no burning torches to scare off predators. Survival depended on silence, on remaining unnoticed, on staying close together. Children and elders were kept deep inside, while stronger adults often slept closer to the edge, listening for movement outside. These shelters were never permanent. People moved with the seasons, with the herds, with the shifting vegetation zones. Life was nomadic by necessity. A cave today, a rocky overhang tomorrow, a hide-covered hut the next week. Each offered only temporary safety, a pause in the constant struggle to endure nights in a world without flame. Night during the Pleistocene was not silent. It was alive with sound: the cough of lions, the laughter-like calls of hyenas, the bone-rattling roars of saber-toothed cats. For early humans without fire, every one of those sounds meant danger. Predators dominated the ecosystems our ancestors lived in. Lions were larger than today's species, roaming in groups across open grasslands. Cave lions, found across Europe and Asia, were massive, sometimes weighing over 300 kilograms. Hyenas were not scavengers only. They were hunters, capable of coordinated attacks that could wipe out an unprotected group. Fossil evidence shows gnaw marks on human bones, grim reminders that humans were as much prey as predator. And then there were the saber-tooths, Smilodon in the Americas, Homotherium in Europe and Africa, cats with elongated fangs, powerful forelimbs, and jaws capable of puncturing deep into flesh. Without fire, humans had no reliable way to deter these animals. Archaeological finds suggest that stones and wooden spears were the only defences, and even those required numbers and courage. Imagine a small group huddled in a cave entrance, clutching sharpened sticks, listening as the sound of hyenas grows louder outside. They could not light a torch. They could not build a barrier of flame. The only strategy was silence and hope. Night watch likely became part of survival. While some tried to sleep, others stayed awake, listening for the scrape of claws on stone or the crunch of footsteps on soil. Sleep was fragmented, shallow, interrupted by sudden noises in the dark. Anthropologists suggest that this constant threat shaped human sleep cycles, producing lighter sleep stages and the habit of group vigilance that persisted long after fire was mastered. Predators forced humans into cooperation. A lone individual stood little chance against a lion pride, but a group could at least mount a defence. This pressure for unity may have been one of the earliest drivers of social bonds. Staying close together at night meant not just warmth, but a wall of bodies ready to resist an attack. Even children and elders played a role. Their survival gave purpose, forcing the strong to protect the weak. But despite these strategies, the balance was never equal. Predators were faster, stronger, better equipped with teeth and claws. Humans were vulnerable. Archaeological digs at Swartkrans Cave in South Africa reveal hominin remains with puncture marks matching leopard fangs. At Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania, bones show evidence of hyena feeding. These are not just fossils. They are records of nights gone wrong, of groups discovered and overpowered. The fear of predators did more than shape behaviour. It carved itself into human psychology. The instinctive fear of the dark, the unease when hearing rustling in the night, the racing heartbeat at unseen movement, all of it has roots in this era. Evolution kept the memory alive because those who ignored the danger rarely survived to pass on their genes. Every night without fire was a test of patience, of silence, of endurance. To close your eyes in the darkness was to gamble that nothing with sharp teeth had found your scent. And every sunrise was not just another day, it was proof that, once again, humanity had survived the predators that owned the night. If you were an early human before the mastery of fire, every meal was a struggle. Food was not guaranteed, and when you found it, the choices were limited and often dangerous. Without fire, the world's menu was raw, tough, and hazardous. The diet of early humans consisted mostly of what could be chewed and swallowed without cooking. That meant raw plants, tubers, fruits, seeds, and, when possible, raw meat scavenged or hunted. Archaeological studies of toothwear patterns on early hominins show heavy abrasion, a sign of diets filled with gritty roots and uncooked vegetation. Unlike modern fruits and vegetables, which have been bred to be soft and sweet, wild plants were fibrous, bitter, and often laced with natural toxins. Meat was another challenge. Early humans could not cook it to soften fibers or kill pathogens. Raw flesh required powerful jaws and teeth to tear and chew, and large portions often rotted before they could be consumed. Scavenging from predator kills was common, but it came with risks: exposure to bacteria, parasites, and competition with dangerous carnivores. Evidence from Olduvai Gorge shows cut marks on bones lying beneath tooth marks from large animals, meaning humans often arrived second, stripping scraps after lions or hyenas had eaten first. Health problems followed. Without cooking, food was less digestible, limiting the calories extracted. This put strict caps on growth and energy. Anthropologist Richard Wrangham has argued that the breakthrough of cooked food, much later, was what allowed the human brain to expand, because raw diets simply could not provide enough efficient energy. Before fire, our ancestors had to spend much more time chewing, sometimes 4 to 6 hours a day, just to break down the food they collected. Disease was another danger. Raw meat carried parasites such as trichinella and tapeworms. Water was often contaminated. Without boiling, early humans had no way to purify it. The result was chronic exposure to illness that could weaken or kill. Even plant foods carried risks. Some roots and nuts contained toxins that cooking would later neutralize, but in a fireless world, they were eaten at great cost. Preservation was impossible. Without smoke or heat, food spoiled quickly. Any meat not eaten immediately attracted flies, bacteria, and scavengers. This forced groups into constant movement, searching daily for new sources. Famine was common, especially in cold seasons when plants disappeared and animals were scarce. Despite all this, humans adapted. They developed stone tools to scrape marrow from bones, a rich calorie source hidden inside. They cracked open nuts with rocks. They learned which plants were edible and which were fatal through painful trial and error. But the ceiling was always low. Raw food kept people alive, but it did not allow them to thrive. This dietary struggle left its mark on the body. Fossil evidence shows early humans with massive jaws and teeth adapted for chewing. Their rib cages were wider, accommodating larger guts necessary to process tough, fibrous food. Compared to modern humans, they spent more energy digesting and less on brain power. Fire would later flip this balance, but in the fireless world, survival meant endurance, not innovation. For countless generations, this was the reality. To eat was to fight, not against hunger alone, but against the very limitations of the human body. Before fire shaped human life, stone did. Long before our ancestors learned to spark flames, they learned to strike rocks, and from that simple act came the first real technology in human history. The earliest evidence of stone tool making dates back about 2.6 million years in East Africa. Archaeologists call this the Oldowan tradition. These were not polished or refined tools, but sharp flakes chipped off from larger stones. To modern eyes, they might look like broken rocks, but to early humans they were game changers. With these flakes, they could cut through animal hides, slice meat, and crack open bones to reach the marrow inside, one of the richest calorie sources available. At sites like Gona in Ethiopia and Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania, thousands of such flakes have been found, scattered near butchered animal bones. Roughly 1,000,000 years later, another tradition appeared, the Herculean hand axe. These were larger, more symmetrical tools, shaped like teardrops or avat blades. They were made by Homo erectus and later species across Africa, Europe, and Asia. Unlike older one flakes, Herculean hand axes required skill. They were not just smashed rocks. They were carefully crafted, often with dozens of strikes to produce a balanced, sharp-edged tool. Archaeologists considered them the first evidence of human planning, of an ability to visualize a final shape and work toward it. For survival before fire, these tools were essential. With sharp stone in hand, humans could process food faster, defend themselves against predators, and scrape hides for clothing or shelter. The evidence suggests that even without fire, stone technology expanded what was possible. Humans became more efficient scavengers, capable of stripping carcasses clean before lions or hyenas returned. They could access new food sources like bone marrow and brain tissue that other animals left behind. But stone tools were more than survival aids. They were a turning point in cognition. To make an Herculean hand axe required patience, teaching, and memory. Skills were passed from one generation to the next, forming some of the earliest cultural traditions. Long before firelight illuminated the night, the spark of intelligence was already visible, in stone. Before fire gave humans light and protection, hunting was an act of calculated risk. Imagine standing on an open plain during the Pleistocene. Around you are animals far larger, faster, and more dangerous than anything alive today. Mammoths towering above trees, bison in massive herds, wild horses and antelope darting like shadows. To take down even one meant survival, but also enormous risk. The earliest hunters relied on stone-tipped spears and wooden thrusting weapons. Without fire to harden spear points, wood could splinter on impact, making weapons fragile. Archaeological finds such as the Schooningen spears in Germany, dating to around 300,000 years ago, show that early humans carved long wooden spears, carefully balanced for thrusting at close range. These were not projectiles thrown from safety. They required hunters to approach within meters of massive animals, facing the full force of tusks, horns, or hooves. Most hunts were not solitary. Cooperation was critical. A group could encircle prey, drive animals toward traps, or push them off natural cliffs. At La Côte de Saint-Brelade on the island of Jersey, evidence suggests Neanderthals herded mammoths toward ravines, creating kill sites where the animals had no escape. This was brutal but effective, a way to turn intelligence into an advantage over size and strength. But not every attempt succeeded. Without fire to preserve meat, the reward of a kill was temporary, and the cost of failure was high. Injuries from horns, bites, or trampling were often fatal. A broken bone or deep wound meant infection, with no flames to sterilize tools or cauterize wounds. Many simply did not survive their mistakes. Scavenging was just as common as hunting. Archaeologists find cut marks on bones layered beneath tooth marks from predators, suggesting humans often arrived late to carcasses, stealing what they could before lions or hyenas returned. This carried risks of its own. Predators rarely tolerated competitors, and a group of hyenas could drive humans away with ease. Still, these efforts shaped human behavior. Hunting and scavenging demanded planning, communication, and trust within the group. Every member had a role: scouts to track, drivers to chase, and cutters to harvest meat quickly. Success fed not only bodies but social bonds. In a fireless world, every hunt was a gamble. There was no way to light torches to drive animals, no flames to keep predators at a distance. It was humans, armed with stone and courage, against beasts that had dominated the landscape for millennia. The fact that they survived at all speaks to a resilience that would later, with the help of fire, transform them from prey into apex predators. Without fire, every meal required physical effort. Hunting or scavenging provided the carcass, but eating it was another challenge entirely. Early humans had only stone tools, flakes, scrapers, and hand axes, to process what they gathered. Yet these simple tools were enough to open a new world of nutrition. Archaeological sites like Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania show clear-cut marks on animal bones. These marks prove that hominins stripped flesh with sharp stone flakes and cracked bones to reach marrow. Marrow was vital. Dense in fat and calories, it gave more energy than lean muscle. Skulls were smashed open for brains, another rich source of fat that no predator touched. In a world without cooking, marrow and brain tissue may have been the most important calories available. Plants required different techniques. Roots and tubers were dug up using pointed sticks or stones, then chewed raw. Wild nuts and seeds were cracked with rocks. Some leaves and fruits were edible straight from the tree, but many were tough, bitter, or mildly toxic. Without fire to neutralize plant toxins, trial and error determined what could be safely eaten. Mistakes cost lives, but knowledge passed down kept groups alive. Chewing dominated daily life. Studies suggest that early humans spent hours each day breaking down fibrous plants and raw meat. The jawbones of species like Homo erectus show massive chewing muscles, evidence of this relentless grind. Unlike today, where cooking softens food and frees time, the fireless diet chained people to the task of eating itself. Preservation was almost impossible. Raw meat spoiled within hours in warm climates, drawing insects and predators. Some groups may have buried food in cool soil or left it in shaded areas, but evidence shows these methods were limited. Most food had to be consumed immediately, which meant constant searching for the next meal. This raw, labour-intensive diet shaped both body and behaviour. Large teeth and powerful jaws were biological adaptations, but socially it meant food was always urgent, always pressing. Meals were not moments of relaxation around a fire, but frantic, messy affairs. Tearing, chewing, swallowing before darkness fell and predators returned. For humans without fire, eating was survival stripped to its core. No flavour, no comfort, only calories. Life before fire was not just about tools and food, it was about people. Without the comfort of flames to gather around, survival depended on cooperation in its rawest form. Every member of a group mattered, and the bonds between them were often the only shield against a hostile world. Hunting, for example, demanded teamwork. One person could not bring down a large animal. Instead, groups coordinated, some driving prey toward others who waited with spears or stones. Communication may have been basic, using gestures, sounds, or early proto-language, but it was enough to synchronize movements. Archaeologists studying kill sites see evidence of this coordination. Multiple cut marks from different tools on the same carcass, suggesting several people worked together to butcher meat quickly before predators returned. Food sharing became a powerful glue. Without preservation, any kill had to be eaten fast. To waste food was to risk starvation later. Distributing meat among the group ensured that everyone survived, not just the strongest. Studies of modern hunter-gatherer societies, often used as analogies for the past, show that sharing food creates trust, reduces conflict, and reinforces social bonds. The same principles likely applied hundreds of thousands of years ago. Child rearing also required cooperation. Infants and young children were vulnerable in a fireless world. They needed warmth, protection, and constant care. Anthropologists argue that cooperative breeding, where not just mothers but other group members helped raise children, was one of the key evolutionary strategies that allowed humans to thrive. Grandparents, siblings, and unrelated adults all played roles, strengthening the sense of community. Nighttime added another layer. With predators prowling outside and no fire to keep them away, groups often organized informal watches. Some stayed alert while others slept, creating a rhythm of vigilance that kept everyone alive. This meant trust was not optional. Each person depended on others to stay awake, to listen, to act if danger approached. Conflict, of course, existed. Competition for food, mates, or shelter could divide groups. But without cooperation, survival odds dropped sharply. The harshness of the environment left little room for isolation. To be cut off from the group was usually a death sentence. In this way, the absence of fire may have been one of the forces that shaped humanity's deeply social nature. Working together, sharing food, protecting children, and organizing defenses against predators were not luxuries. They were necessities. Over generations, these practices created strong social instincts that remain hardwired in us today. Before fire, humans did not gather around light. They gathered around survival itself, and in doing so, they laid the foundation for the cooperation that would one day define entire civilizations. For early humans without fire, food was never guaranteed. Every single day began with the same question: where will the next meal come from? Without methods to preserve meat or plants, Survival depended on constant movement and constant searching. Gathering plants was the backbone of the diet. Women, children, and elders often took the role of foragers, combing landscapes for edible fruits, nuts, and roots. Archaeological evidence from sites in Africa suggests that tubers and underground roots were especially important, dug out with sharpened sticks or bare hands. These foods were calorie-dense and could be eaten raw, though often bitter and fibrous. Fruits were seasonal and unpredictable. Seeds and nuts provided bursts of energy, but cracking them open without modern tools meant hours of labour with stones. Hunting and scavenging filled the gaps, but they could not be relied upon daily. A successful hunt might feed the group for one evening, but by the next morning, the meat was rotting. Insects swarmed, predators circled, and bacteria spread fast. With no fire to dry or smoke food, early humans had no choice but to consume quickly and discard what was left. This created a cycle of scarcity. Even after a big kill, the group could not relax. The following day brought the same pressure to find something new. Archaeologists studying bone sites see this pattern clearly. Scattered remains of animals consumed rapidly, often abandoned half-eaten because the risk of staying outweighed the benefit of finishing. Seasons made the challenge even sharper. During colder months, plant foods grew scarce, and hunting became the main hope. But hunters risked injury and failure, while gatherers returned with empty hands. Starvation was common, especially for children and the elderly, whose weaker bodies could not endure long stretches without food. This relentless need to gather shaped human behaviour. Groups moved constantly, following herds, rivers, or fruiting plants. Camps were temporary by necessity. Survival was not about storing food, it was about finding it faster than it spoiled. Life without preservation meant living one step away from hunger at all times. It was a world where abundance lasted only hours, and every sunrise began the struggle again. In the modern world, a small cut is an inconvenience. In a fireless world, it could be a death sentence. Without the ability to boil water, sterilize tools, or cauterize wounds, early humans lived in constant vulnerability to disease and infection. Parasites were everywhere. Eating raw meat meant swallowing the eggs of tapeworms or roundworms. Trichinella, a parasite carried by wild animals, could spread through undercooked flesh. But in this era, there was no such thing as cooked. Once inside the body, parasites caused fever, diarrhea, muscle pain, and weakness. Archaeological studies of ancient coprolites, preserved human feces, reveal parasite eggs in large numbers, showing just how common these infections were. Water was no safer. Streams and rivers carried bacteria and protozoa invisible to the eye. Without boiling to kill pathogens, every drink carried a risk of dysentery or cholera-like symptoms. A single outbreak of diarrhea could wipe out the fragile energy reserves of a small group, especially children. Injuries were another constant threat. Hunting meant confronting massive animals armed with tusks, horns, and claws. A broken bone from a kick or a deep gash from a predator's teeth could quickly turn fatal. With no fire to sterilize, wounds festered. Infection set in, leading to swelling, fever, and often death. Evidence from hominin fossils shows bone infections, untreated fractures, and healed injuries that suggest both high risk and occasional survival through group care. Teeth tell another story of hardship. Constantly chewing raw plants and sinew wore enamel down early, exposing nerves and causing abscesses. Without the ability to heat food, soften it, or destroy bacteria, oral infections were common and sometimes fatal. A toothache in the Pleistocene was not a small annoyance. It could mean blood poisoning and death. Fire's absence also shaped childbirth. Women gave birth without sterile conditions, and infection was a leading cause of death for both mothers and infants. Anthropologists believed that mortality rates were extremely high, with many children not surviving their first years. What made survival possible was not medicine, but community. Group members tended to the injured, carrying them, feeding them, and protecting them when they could not protect themselves. This early form of care may have been one of humanity's strongest evolutionary advantages, cooperation as medicine. Still, the reality was brutal. Every scratch, every sip of water, every bite of raw meat carried risks invisible but deadly. In a fireless world, the fight for survival was not only against predators and hunger, but against the microscopic enemies that fire would one day keep at bay. For early humans without fire, raising children was one of the greatest challenges of survival. Infancy and childhood were fragile stages of life even in later times, but in a world without warmth, cooked food, or light in the dark, the risks were multiplied. Newborns were especially vulnerable to cold. Archaeological studies of Pleistocene climates show that even in regions near the equator, nighttime temperatures could drop sharply. Without fire to keep shelters warm, infants relied entirely on body heat. Mothers held them close, wrapped in animal skins or plant fibers, while others in the group often took turns cradling them. Anthropologists call this cooperative care, a system where not just parents but siblings, grandparents, and even unrelated group members helped raise the young. In an environment this hostile, survival depended on everyone sharing responsibility. Nutrition was another obstacle. Without cooked foods, infants and young children had to wait until their digestive systems were strong enough to handle raw plants and meat. Until then, they relied on breastfeeding for survival. For mothers, this meant a heavy physical cost, providing calories in a time when food was scarce and energy constantly drained. If a mother became ill or died, the group faced a difficult choice: attempt to nurse the child through another caregiver, or accept the likely loss. Injury and disease struck children harder than adults. Their smaller bodies could not withstand dehydration from diarrhea, fevers caused by parasites, or infections from cuts. Archaeologists have found fossilized remains of young hominins with signs of malnutrition, anemia, and disease, evidence that childhood mortality was extremely high. Some estimates suggest that in early human populations, fewer than half of children survived past age 5. Yet despite the dangers, children were precious. They represented the future of the group, and their survival gave purpose to the risks adults took. Fossil evidence of healed injuries in young individuals suggests that groups went to great lengths to protect and care for them, even when resources were scarce. This care may have been one of the earliest expressions of the deep social bonds that define humanity. At night, children were placed at the center of sleeping groups, shielded by the bodies of adults. This human wall was their only defense against the cold and predators. Without fire, there were no lullabies by the hearth, no glowing embers to ward off fear. Childhood was lived in darkness, where safety was always temporary and every night was a battle against the unknown. Still, even in these harsh conditions, children laughed, played and learned. Simple games with stones or sticks prepared them for the skills they would need later. Hunting, foraging, tool-making. They were not just survivors, they were apprentices of survival itself. Raising children before fire was a gamble against impossible odds, and yet, enough survived to carry humanity forward. Proof that cooperation and care could succeed even in a world without flame. Sleep is one of the most basic human needs, but before fire, sleep was never safe. Every night was a compromise between exhaustion and danger, between the body's demand for rest and the predators waiting in the dark. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer groups like the Hadza of Tanzania have observed something called the sentinel hypothesis. The idea is simple. In groups, sleep is staggered. Some people are always awake, either by choice or by natural rhythm, creating an unbroken chain of vigilance. This pattern likely stretches back into deep prehistory, when the absence of fire made constant watchfulness the only protection against the night. Imagine an early human camp pressed into the back of a cave or nestled under an overhang. Children are bundled at the center, the weakest protected by layers of bodies around them. Adults on the edges shift uneasily in shallow sleep, one ear tuned to the scrape of claws or the crunch of footsteps. Deep sleep is rare. Sudden noises pull the group awake in seconds. A snarl from outside could mean a predator probing for weakness, or another group of humans competing for shelter. The result was a fractured sleep cycle. Instead of long, uninterrupted rest, early humans likely slept in short bursts, broken by watch shifts and alarms. This constant interruption left them vulnerable to fatigue, but the alternative, full, unguarded sleep, would have been fatal. Fossil evidence of predator attacks on hominin remains shows that vigilance was justified. Leopards, lions, and hyenas did not hesitate to strike. Cold nights made sleep even harder. Without fire, warmth came only from skins and shared body heat. Groups slept pressed together in clusters, using physical closeness as insulation. This arrangement not only preserved heat but reinforced social bonds. To sleep alone in a fireless world was to court death. The psychology of fear also played a role. Even today, humans retain a primal unease about darkness. Our fear of night, of rustling sounds we cannot see, of eyes watching us from shadows. These instincts were carved during countless generations when sleep meant exposure. Evolution favoured those who stayed alert, who woke easily, who felt anxiety when the dark closed in. Those traits increased survival odds, passing into the modern human mind. Some researchers argue that this harsh sleep environment shaped human cognition. Lighter, fragmented sleep may have increased dreaming, aiding memory and problem-solving. Others suggest it encouraged cooperation. Knowing that others were watching allowed some to rest, however briefly, while the group as a whole remained protected. But there was always a cost. Chronic fatigue, illness from poor rest, and accidents caused by exhaustion would have been constant. The price of survival was never a full night's peace. In this world, sunrise was more than a change of light. It was relief. Each dawn meant the group had endured another night without fire, another night of shallow breaths, nervous ears, and waiting for danger to strike. Sleep, something we take for granted today, was in the Pleistocene a fragile victory wrestled from the darkness. In a world without fire, survival depended on more than tools or strength. It depended on communication. Early humans had to coordinate hunts, warn of predators, share knowledge of food sources, and care for children. But how did they do this before the development of fully structured language? Anthropologists suggest that the earliest forms of communication were likely a mix of gestures, facial expressions, and simple vocalizations. A raised hand could signal danger. A pointed finger might indicate a direction of movement. Short calls, grunts, clicks, or cries served as warnings or alerts. These primitive signals may not have conveyed complex stories, but they were enough to organize group action in the moment. Fossil evidence hints at the timeline. The hyoid bone, critical for speech, appears in forms similar to ours in Neanderthals, and possibly earlier hominins like Homo heidelbergensis. This suggests that by several 100,000 years ago humans had begun to develop the anatomy for speech. But even before that, sound played a role. Chimpanzees today use over 30 distinct calls. Early humans likely had even richer repertoires. Communication mattered most in high-risk situations. During hunts, silent gestures may have directed movement, while sudden shouts helped coordinate attacks. At night, when predators approached, low warning calls may have alerted others without drawing too much attention. Archaeologists studying kill sites note evidence of coordinated butchering, multiple individuals working efficiently together, which would have been nearly impossible without some form of structured signalling. Beyond survival, communication also built social bonds. Mothers comforted infants with sounds. Group members signaled affection, anger, or trust through tone and expression. These interactions strengthened cooperation, the foundation of group survival. Even without firelight to gather around, humans found ways to share emotion and intent in the dark. Some researchers argue that the stress of life before fire, constant movement, predators, unpredictable food, accelerated the need for communication. Groups that could coordinate better, warn faster, and plan more effectively had higher survival odds. Language, in its earliest forms, may have been born not around a hearth, but in the shadows of fear. Over time, these proto-languages likely grew more complex. Rhythms, repeated patterns of sound, and combinations of gestures created shared meaning. This early communication was not yet storytelling. That would come with firelight, but it was the seed. In the silence of a dark cave or the open night, a single sound could mean survival. The roots of human language were planted long before fire, forged in necessity, shaped by danger, and carried forward by every group that lived to see another dawn. Long before humans told stories around a fire, they imagined them in the dark. The absence of light left room for fear, and fear gave birth to the earliest myths. In the Pleistocene night, every sound mattered. A rustle in the grass, a shadow moving against the stars, the glint of eyes at the cave's edge, all demanded explanation. Without science, explanation came through imagination. Early humans may not have spoken in full language, but they could still form ideas. Something is out there. It is dangerous. It waits in the dark. Over time, these ideas became shared beliefs, the seeds of myth. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer groups find striking parallels. In cultures that live closer to nature, myths often revolve around night spirits, predators, and unseen dangers. It is likely that the same patterns existed hundreds of thousands of years ago. A growl in the distance became more than an animal. It became a presence. A storm at night was not just weather, it was a force with intent. The lack of fire amplified this tendency. Darkness was total. Without even the faint glow of embers, caves were pitch black, forests impenetrable. Human vision is poor at night, and in that blindness the mind filled gaps with imagination. What could not be seen was imagined, sometimes as predator, sometimes as spirit. These proto-myths had practical value. Believing in night spirits, for example, kept children from wandering too far from the group. Attributing danger to supernatural causes may have reinforced vigilance. Fear was adaptive. A child who believed the dark has eyes was more likely to survive than one who wandered freely. Over generations, these fears solidified into the earliest cultural frameworks. They were not yet stories as we know them, but warnings, lessons, shared understandings whispered in the dark. Do not sleep near the cave mouth. Do not walk alone. Stay close, or the night will take you. Before fire gave humans light to tell myths around, the myths themselves were already alive, born in the silence, shaped by fear, and passed from one breath to another in the dark. Fear is not just an emotion. It is a survival mechanism, one of the oldest tools the brain has. For early humans living without fire, fear was both constant and necessary. It shaped how they behaved, how they interacted, and ultimately how their minds evolved. Predator encounters were one of the strongest drivers of fear. Fossil evidence from caves in South Africa shows hominin bones with puncture marks from leopards. To survive in such an environment, humans needed to detect danger quickly. Over time, those who reacted fastest, who froze, fled, or defended themselves at the slightest sound, survived more often than those who ignored warning signs. Fear, therefore, was naturally selected. This evolutionary pressure left deep marks on the human brain. The amygdala, the brain's fear center, became finely tuned to detect threats. Even today, humans are more likely to notice snakes, spiders, and animal-like shapes in the dark than neutral objects. These biases are not accidents. They are echoes of an ancient world where failing to notice meant death. The absence of fire intensified these pressures. Night was not only cold, it was dangerous and unpredictable. In total darkness, vision failed, and the mind filled the void with heightened vigilance. Every sound, a snap of a branch, the flap of wings, the rustle of leaves, triggered alarm. Neuroscientists call this hypervigilance, a state where the nervous system stays on high alert. For early humans, hypervigilance was the norm. Fear also had a social function. Groups that stayed close together out of mutual anxiety survived more often. Children who internalized fear of the dark were less likely to wander and be taken by predators. Adults who cooperated to watch for threats increased group survival. In this way, fear was not just individual, it was collective, binding groups together through shared caution. Some researchers suggest that fear even laid the groundwork for imagination and abstract thought. In the dark, where shapes were unclear, the mind learned to project possibilities. That shadow might be a predator. Over time, this ability to imagine unseen threats may have expanded into broader cognitive skills, anticipating outcomes, planning ahead, even storytelling. Fear, in other words, pushed humans toward more complex thinking. Modern humans still carry this inheritance. Our instinctive fear of the dark, of isolation, of sudden noises in the night, is not irrational. It is the residue of millions of years when fear was the difference between life and death. In a world without fire, fear was not weakness. It was intelligence in its rawest form, a sharpened edge that cut through the darkness and kept humanity alive long enough to reach the age of flame. In later human history, the hearth became the heart of the group, a place where food was cooked, stories were told, and leadership often emerged. But before fire, there was no central point to gather around. Social life was organized differently, shaped by necessity rather than choice. Archaeologists studying early hominin sites see signs of temporary camps and scattered tool use, but no evidence of structured communal spaces. Without a hearth to pull people inward, groups likely spread loosely, clustering for warmth or protection but without a fixed center. This made hierarchy more fluid. Leadership was situational. The best hunter might lead during a hunt, the most vigilant during night watch, the most knowledgeable foragers when gathering plants. Authority shifted with context, not permanence. The absence of fire also limited group size. Without light or heat, small groups were easier to manage and conceal from predators. Anthropologists estimate that early human bands may have numbered only a dozen or so individuals. Large gatherings risked detection, while small groups could move quickly and remain hidden. This scale naturally flattened hierarchy. There was little room for rigid dominant structures in groups that survived through cooperation. Still, differences in age, skill, and physical strength mattered. Elders, despite frailty, carried memory, knowledge of landscapes, plants, and migration routes. Their experience made them valuable advisors, if not permanent leaders. Stronger individuals may have taken protective roles, but without the ability to store food or defend fixed camps, no one could dominate for long. Resources were too fleeting, danger too constant. What replaced formal hierarchy was interdependence. Every member mattered. Children required care but also brought energy and new hands for gathering. Adults hunted and defended. Elders preserved knowledge. Cooperation was survival, and any attempt at rigid dominance would have weakened the group. The hearth would later create stable centers where leadership, ritual, and hierarchy could flourish. But in the fireless world, hierarchy was temporary, fragile, and always tied to immediate need. Without fire, there was no throne, only shifting roles in the endless struggle to see another day. Long before humans learned to create fire, they witnessed it in the wild. The most common source was the sky itself. Lightning striking dry grasslands could set entire plains ablaze. To people living in the Pleistocene, this was no ordinary event. It was both danger and opportunity, an uncontrollable force that transformed the landscape overnight. Imagine a small group moving across a savanna. A storm builds in the distance. The flash of lightning splits the sky, followed by fire spreading through tall grass with terrifying speed. Smoke chokes the air, animals stampede, and humans scramble to escape. For them, fire was not yet a tool. It was a predator of its own kind, fast, unpredictable, and merciless. But once the flames passed, they left behind something valuable. Burned landscapes exposed roasted seeds, charred roots, and carcasses of animals too slow to flee. These accidental meals introduced humans to the taste of cooked food long before they mastered it themselves. Some archaeologists believe that such encounters sparked curiosity, the realization that heat could transform what they ate, making it softer, safer, and more nourishing. Wildfires also changed the environment. After the flames, new plants sprouted in nutrient-rich ash, drawing herbivores back to the area. Humans learned to follow this cycle. Fire drove animals out, and later it attracted them again. Even without control, fire reshaped migration routes and foraging strategies. Lightning was not the only source. Volcanic eruptions, though rarer, created spectacular displays of molten fire, lava flows, and burning forests. For early humans, these eruptions must have been both terrifying and unforgettable. Fossil records show that populations often abandoned regions after volcanic events, but they may also have scavenged the remains of animals killed in the destruction. At this stage, fire was still something humans observed, not something they owned. It was awe-inspiring, destructive, and mysterious, a force from the heavens that could not be explained. They did not yet carry it, protect it, or make it, but they knew it existed. For hundreds of thousands of years, fire was a phenomenon at the edge of human life, glimpsed during storms, feared during wildfires, and remembered long after the flames died. It was both threat and promise, waiting to be brought under human control. If lightning was humanity's first teacher about fire, volcanoes were the second, and they spoke with far greater violence. For early humans, an erupting volcano was a cataclysm. Walls of smoke blotted out the sun, rivers of molten rock burned everything in their path, and ash rained down over entire regions. Unlike lightning fires, which came and went quickly, volcanic fire transformed entire landscapes for generations. Archaeological evidence shows that humans lived near active volcanic zones in East Africa and the Mediterranean. Sites like Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania are layered with volcanic ash, recording repeated eruptions across hundreds of thousands of years. For people living nearby, the experience must have been overwhelming. Imagine standing on open ground, watching a mountain split apart, the earth itself glowing red. To a species without science or fire-making, this was not geology. It was power beyond comprehension. And yet volcanoes also created opportunities. After eruptions, animals often died from heat, gases, or ash. Their carcasses, partially cooked or preserved in cooling lava flows, provided food for scavengers, including humans. Ash-rich soils later produced fertile grounds where plants returned in abundance, drawing herds and hunters back to the region. Some researchers suggest that volcanic activity may even have influenced migration. Massive eruptions, such as the Toba super-eruption around 74,000 years ago, blanketed huge areas with ash, forcing populations to move. Though catastrophic, these events also exposed early humans to fire on an enormous scale, reinforcing its role as both destroyer and creator. To witness lava itself was unlike anything else. Rivers of glowing stone that could not be touched, mountains that spat flames into the sky. Such images would have burned into memory. Fear was inevitable, but fascination too. Fire was no longer only in the sky or the grass, it lived inside the earth. At this stage, humans still had no control. They could only watch from the edges, keeping their distance or fleeing when eruptions grew deadly. But the memory of volcanic fire, its light, its heat, its destruction, deepened their awareness of fire's dual nature. It could kill in an instant, but it could also transform the land in ways nothing else could. For early humans, volcanoes were not just natural disasters. They were reminders that fire was everywhere, waiting, in the sky, in the earth, and eventually in their own hands. Chapter 3. For countless generations, fire was something humans only watched from a distance. But at some point, curiosity turned into courage. Instead of fleeing from flames, our ancestors began to approach them, risking burns and predators to capture what nature had created. These first attempts to steal fire marked a turning point in human history. Imagine a wildfire slowly dying after a storm. The grass is blackened, trees smoulder, and glowing embers remain scattered on the ground. To step into such a landscape was dangerous. Hidden flames could reignite and smoke could choke the lungs. Yet humans crept closer, recognizing the value of what was left behind. Archaeological speculation suggests that they may have carried burning branches or glowing coals back to shelters, carefully protecting them during the journey. Keeping fire alive was a challenge of its own. Without the ability to spark flames on demand, survival depended on nurturing embers for as long as possible. Groups likely developed techniques to slow the dying of coals, burying them under ash to keep them smouldering, or adding dry grass and bark to revive the flame. Ethnographic parallels from modern societies that preserve fire in similar ways support this theory. Fire, once captured, was treated not as a tool but almost as a living thing that had to be fed and guarded. But fire could not be hoarded easily. Rain, wind, or neglect could extinguish it, leaving a group helpless until the next natural source appeared. This vulnerability may have encouraged early humans to stay close to burned landscapes or return to areas where lightning or volcanic activity was frequent. Sites like Gesher Benot Yaakov in Israel show evidence of controlled fire use around 780,000 years ago, suggesting that by then people had learned not just to steal but to maintain it. The act of carrying fire changed group dynamics. Someone had to guard the flame, ensuring it did not die. This responsibility may have created new roles within bands, a designated firekeeper, an early form of specialization. Fire became a shared resource, binding groups together around a single fragile glow. These early attempts were imperfect, often ending in failure. But each success, each night spent with firelight instead of darkness, revealed what was possible. With fire, raw meat softened, predators hesitated, and the cold retreated. Even if it had to be borrowed from nature, even if it flickered out too soon, the knowledge that fire could be theirs, even temporarily, was enough to change everything. The spark of mastery had not yet arrived, but the first embers were in human hands. For early humans, fire was never neutral. It was both the most terrifying force they encountered and the most promising. Approaching it meant risk, burns, smoke, and sudden flare-ups. But avoiding it meant losing access to its benefits. Every decision to reach for fire balanced between danger and survival. The dangers were immediate. A branch carried back from a wildfire could ignite a shelter made of dry grass and skins. An ember dropped carelessly could burn a hand or foot. In a world without medicine, even a small burn might lead to infection and death. Groups that mishandled fire may have been wiped out entirely, leaving no descendants to tell the story. For those who succeeded, however, the rewards were unlike anything else in nature. Fire extended the day. For the first time, humans could push back against darkness. Predators that once prowled the edges of camps hesitated when flames burned. Archaeological evidence suggests that early fire use coincides with expansion into colder climates, a sign that warmth from flames made survival possible in regions once unreachable. Food was another revolution. Charred meat and softened roots were easier to chew and digest, unlocking calories that raw diets had hidden. Even occasional access to cooked food may have boosted energy levels, giving fire-using groups an advantage over those still relying on raw diets. Richard Wrangham's cooking hypothesis suggests this dietary shift was one of the key drivers of human brain growth. But fire's opportunity was not only practical, it reshaped social life. When groups gathered around flames, they created a shared centre, a place where cooperation deepened. Light allowed for communication after sunset. Safety allowed for planning beyond the immediate moment. Over time, these gatherings planted the seeds of storytelling, teaching, and culture. Still, fire remained unpredictable. It could be lost in an instant, extinguished by rain or wind. Groups that became dependent on it faced new challenges, guarding the flame, transporting embers, and restarting fires they had not yet learned to make. To live with fire was to live with a fragile ally, one that demanded constant care. In this way, fire was both a teacher and a test. It showed early humans what was possible: warmth, safety, nourishment, but also reminded them that power came with responsibility. Those who treated fire carelessly suffered. Those who respected it gained a new edge in the struggle for survival. By the time humans moved from merely stealing flames to mastering their creation, fire had already proven itself as the most dangerous and most transformative force they had ever encountered. The story of fire's mastery is written not only in myth, but in stone, ash, and bone. Archaeologists have uncovered powerful evidence that by nearly 800,000 years ago, humans were no longer just borrowing flames from nature, they were controlling them. Two sites in particular, Wonderwerk Cave in South Africa and Gesher Benot Yaakov in Israel, provide some of the clearest windows into this turning point. At Wonderwerk Cave, layers of sediment nearly 2 kilometers deep reveal an extraordinary record of human occupation stretching back almost 2 million years. Within those layers, researchers discovered ash deposits, burned bone fragments, and charred plant remains dating to about 1 million years ago. The critical detail is location. The ash was found deep inside the cave, far from any entrance where wildfire could have naturally spread. This means that fire was carried in and maintained by humans. Burned tools and bones suggest they were using flames not just for warmth, but for processing food. Half a continent away, at Gesher Benot Yaakov in Israel's Jordan Valley, another piece of the puzzle emerged. Excavations revealed concentrations of burned flint tools and plant material dated to roughly 780,000 years ago. What makes this site remarkable is its scale. Fire traces appear across different layers, suggesting repeated and intentional use over time. Here, humans seem to have not only captured fire but integrated it into their daily survival. These discoveries mark a profound shift. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans had depended on luck, finding fire after storms or volcanic eruptions. At Wonderwerk and Gesher, we see evidence of something different: deliberate maintenance. Groups tended flames, feeding them with wood, perhaps even transporting embers as they moved. Fire was no longer chance. It was part of life. The impact was immediate. Burned bones at both sites suggest meat was roasted, reducing parasites and making food easier to digest. Charred plant remains show early experiments in cooking tubers and seeds. Fire inside caves extended usable space, driving predators away and transforming deep shelters into safe homes. Not every site from this era shows fire use, reminding us that mastery spread unevenly. Some groups remained without it, vulnerable in the old ways. But those who controlled fire gained advantages in survival, health, and expansion. Over time, the gap between fire users and those without would widen, shaping the course of human evolution. The evidence from Wonderwerk and Gescher is more than ash and charcoal. It is the archaeological fingerprint of humanity's first great conquest, the moment when people stopped being mere witnesses to fire and became its keepers. Once humans learned to keep fire alive, the next challenge was even greater. Making it themselves, depending on nature, was unreliable. Storms and eruptions were rare, and flames could die suddenly. To break free from chance, people needed methods to spark fire on demand. Archaeological and ethnographic evidence suggests two primary techniques gradually emerged: striking stones to produce sparks and using friction to generate heat. The first relied on specific minerals. Striking a piece of flint against iron pyrite or another hard stone produced a shower of sparks. With practice, these sparks could be caught on dry tinder, grasses, bark, or fungus like amadou. Excavations at European Paleolithic sites reveal flint fragments with wear patterns consistent with this use. Later, as humans began carrying toolkits, flint became as essential as any weapon. A spark could mean survival. The second method, friction, required patience and skill. By rubbing two pieces of wood together or spinning a stick against a wooden base, heat built until tinder ignited. Ethnographic parallels show that bow drills, hand drills, and fire ploughs were common among traditional societies, though it is debated exactly when early humans first mastered them. What is certain is that producing fire this way demanded both knowledge and cooperation, holding the spindle steady, feeding tinder at the right moment, and shielding the infant flame from wind. Each success would have felt miraculous. From nothing but stone, wood, and determination, light appeared. Groups that mastered these techniques no longer lived in fear of losing their flame to rain or neglect. Fire was no longer a gift from the heavens. It was theirs to create. The ability to generate fire fundamentally altered human mobility. People could move into colder climates without relying on luck. They could establish longer-lasting camps, confident they could relight flames if needed. This independence expanded the range of human migration, fueling the great dispersals of Homo erectus and later Homo sapiens. The social impact was just as profound. Fire-making became knowledge worth teaching, a skill that may have elevated individuals within groups. The firemaker could be respected, even revered, for holding the secret to survival. In some cultures thousands of years later, this role would take on spiritual significance, with myths about firebringers echoing humanity's earlier struggles. The leap from borrowing flames to sparking them was not a single invention, but a gradual process, refined over generations. Yet its effect was revolutionary. For the first time, humans controlled one of nature's rawest powers entirely on their own terms. The mastery of sparks and friction was more than a survival trick. It was the first true technology of creation. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans were not the rulers of the night. They were its prey. Lions, hyenas, leopards, and saber-toothed cats prowled in darkness, and humans had little more than stones and wooden spears to defend themselves. But once fire came under human control, the balance shifted. Predators fear fire. Even today, wild animals keep their distance from flames, avoiding the heat, smoke, and crackling noise. For early humans, this instinctive reaction was a gift. A single burning branch, waved in the dark, could drive back a lion. A ring of fire around a campsite could deter hyenas. Archaeological evidence suggests that some of the earliest hearths were deliberately placed at cave entrances or camp edges, strategic barriers of light and heat. The transformation was immediate. Where once night meant terror and sleepless vigilance, fire created zones of safety. Humans could finally sleep more deeply, with confidence that predators would hesitate to cross the line of flames. This change altered daily rhythms: less exhaustion, more energy, and longer lifespans. The darkness was no longer absolute. Protection also extended to hunting. With torches, humans could flush animals from hiding places, drive them into traps, or scare them toward waiting hunters. Fire became both shield and weapon. Some researchers suggest that fire-based hunting, setting small grass fires to expose prey, may date back tens of thousands of years, an innovation that turned fear of flames into a tactical advantage. The psychological impact was profound. For the first time, humans had a tool that placed them above larger, stronger predators. Fire did not just scare animals. It gave people a sense of control over their environment. This control may have reinforced social cohesion. Groups gathered around flames not only for warmth, but for the reassurance that the night was no longer entirely hostile. The symbolic power of fire as protector lasted long after prehistory. Myths across cultures depict fire as a divine gift, a force that keeps monsters, spirits, or demons away. These stories echo the reality of the Pleistocene. Without fire, humans were vulnerable. With it, they held a shield against the dark. By taming flames, early humans reversed one of the oldest equations of life. They were no longer prey hiding in shadows. They were guardians of light, creatures who could carve out safety in the middle of a hostile night. Fire did not just keep predators at bay, it turned humans into something predators had to fear. Fire did more than protect and feed. It transformed the way humans related to one another. For the first time in history, groups had a reason to gather in one place, not just to huddle in fear, but to share warmth, safety, and time. Around the fire, social life was born. Archaeologists studying ancient hearths note that they were more than practical cooking spots. Their placement inside caves and camps suggests deliberate gathering spaces. Charred bones, cracked stones, and burned plant remains are often clustered together, marking areas where people sat close. The hearth became a magnet, not only for survival, but for connection. Light extended the day. Before fire, activity ended with sunset. Darkness forced people into silence, broken only by whispered warnings and restless sleep. With flames, humans could remain active after nightfall. This extra time created opportunities no group had ever known, sharing food, planning hunts, teaching skills, and strengthening bonds. It was here, in firelight, that the seeds of culture were planted. Some anthropologists argue that storytelling itself began at the hearth. Freed from immediate danger, people could reflect on past hunts, imagine future ones, and pass down lessons. Children listened, learning not just survival skills but the identity of their group. The flicker of flames lit the first stages of oral tradition. Firelight also shaped emotion. The glow softened expressions, allowing faces to be seen clearly. Eye contact became possible even at night. These subtle changes encouraged empathy and trust, deepening social ties. Around fire, laughter could spread, fears could be soothed, and conflicts could be resolved. It was the earliest stage of human intimacy. Rituals may have emerged here too. The strange, almost hypnotic quality of flames likely inspired awe. Groups may have danced, sung, or performed simple rites, binding individuals into something greater than themselves. What began as a survival tool became a stage for imagination and belief. The hearth also introduced new roles. Someone had to tend the fire, feeding it wood, protecting it from rain, reviving its embers. This responsibility carried weight. To fail meant darkness returned. The role of firekeeper may have been one of the first specialized tasks in human society, a symbol of trust. By gathering around fire, humans created a new kind of night, one where community replaced fear. The same flames that once drove them from wildfires now held them together in safety. In that glow, humanity became not just a species surviving the dark, but a species creating meaning within it. One of the most revolutionary consequences of fire was not warmth or light, but cooking. Anthropologist Richard Wrangham proposed what is now known as the cooking hypothesis, that the control of fire and the shift to cooked food directly fueled the evolution of the human brain. Raw diets, while sustaining, are inefficient. Chewing raw meat, roots, and fibrous plants requires hours of effort and extracts fewer calories. Studies on modern primates show they spend 4 to 6 hours a day chewing. Early humans likely did the same. Without cooking, the digestive system needed to be larger and more energy demanding, leaving less fuel for the brain. Fire changed this equation completely. Cooking softens fibers, breaks down toxins, and kills pathogens. Meat becomes easier to chew and digest. Tubers and roots, once bitter or nearly inedible, turned sweet and calorie-rich when roasted. This transformation meant humans could gain far more energy from the same food. Wrangham argued that this surplus allowed our ancestors to evolve smaller guts and larger brains, a trade-off visible in fossil records. Compared to earlier hominins, Homo erectus had smaller rib cages, indicating reduced gut size, and significantly larger brains. The nutritional boost was not small. Cooking meat increases available calories by up to 30%. For tubers and starches, the increase can be even greater. This efficiency meant less time chewing and more time for other activities: hunting, tool-making, and social interaction. In evolutionary terms, cooking freed up both energy and time, two of the rarest commodities in prehistory. There were also health benefits. Cooked food reduced the risk of parasites and foodborne illness, which had plagued humans in the fireless age. Children, especially vulnerable to disease, gained safer nutrition, increasing survival rates. This may explain why the spread of controlled fire use coincides with population growth and migration into new regions. The social implications were just as important. Meals no longer had to be eaten in haste before food spoiled. Instead, groups could gather around a hearth, sharing roasted meat or softened plants. Eating became communal rather than desperate, reinforcing bonds and traditions. Wrangham's theory remains debated. Some argue cooking came later, others that raw diets could still sustain brain growth. But the archaeological and biological evidence leans strongly in his favour. Fire did more than protect and illuminate. It transformed human biology from the inside out. By cooking, humans unlocked a new level of energy, fueling not only their bodies but their minds. The leap from raw survival to complex thought was not just cultural, it was cooked into the human condition. The human brain is extraordinary and costly. Though it represents only about 2% of body weight, it consumes nearly 20% of the body's energy at rest. For our ancestors, sustaining such a power-hungry organ on a raw diet would have been nearly impossible. This is why the control of fire and the introduction of cooking are seen as pivotal in human evolution. The expensive tissue hypothesis explains the trade-off. Early hominins had large guts, necessary to process raw, fibrous foods. Digesting tough plants and raw meat required more intestinal mass, which consumed significant energy. But energy budgets are limited. If more fuel goes to digestion, less can go to the brain. Something had to change for humans to develop the large, complex brains we know today. Cooking solved this problem. By pre-digesting food through heat, humans reduced the need for massive guts. Fossil evidence supports this. Homo erectus, emerging about 1.8 million years ago, shows a notable reduction in ribcage size and jaw strength compared to earlier hominins, alongside a dramatic increase in cranial capacity. In other words, smaller stomachs and bigger brains. The caloric efficiency of cooked food meant the brain could grow without starving the rest of the body. Roasted tubers delivered sugars quickly, cooked meat offered more available protein and fat, and toxins in plants were neutralized. This gave Homo erectus and later Homo sapiens a consistent surplus of energy, exactly what the brain required. This energy shift also freed time. With less need to spend hours chewing and digesting, humans could devote more of the day to other tasks: tool-making, exploration, social bonding. These activities in turn placed greater demands on cognition, creating a feedback loop. Bigger brains allowed more innovation, which led to better survival strategies, which then reinforced the success of groups with larger brains. The brain's expansion was not just about size, but complexity. Areas associated with memory, planning, and social behavior grew. The ability to anticipate danger, coordinate hunts, and form stronger social groups became defining traits. Fire and food were the fuel, but intelligence was the engine. Even today, the human brain's energy demands reflect this ancient trade-off. Compared to other primates, we eat more calorie-dense foods and spend less time chewing. Our digestive systems are smaller, but our neural capacity far exceeds theirs. Without fire, this leap would have been unlikely. With fire, humanity crossed an evolutionary threshold, exchanging guts for brains, instinct for intellect. It was not just survival that fire enabled, it was the birth of human intelligence itself. The mastery of fire did not just transform diet and survival, it also reshaped how humans used and trusted their senses. In a world once dominated by darkness, fire introduced new ways of seeing, smelling, and even thinking. Sight was the most obvious change. Before fire, night meant blindness. Human eyes are poorly adapted to darkness compared to predators like cats or owls. With flames, the night opened up. The flicker of light extended vision beyond a few meters, making it possible to spot danger before it struck. Firelight also allowed detailed tasks after sunset, repairing tools, preparing food, or comforting children. This expansion of usable time gave humans an advantage no other species possessed. Smell also gained a new role. The scent of smoke became a signal of safety. Over time, humans learned to associate the smell of burning wood with warmth, protection, and food. At the same time, the smell of meat roasting or tubers charring gave cues about edibility and readiness. Fire turned scent into information, an early form of sensory feedback that shaped culture around meals. Hearing changed too. Predators approaching a camp could be seen before they were heard, reducing the constant hypervigilance of the fireless age. The crackle of flames masked subtle noises, creating a kind of psychological shield. This steady background sound may have soothed anxiety, allowing for deeper sleep than was possible in total silence. Even touch was transformed. Fire brought warmth, freeing humans from the numbness of cold nights, but it also taught caution. Burns from flames or hot stones left lasting lessons. Fire demanded respect, and through painful experience humans developed new awareness of danger. Psychologically, fire engaged multiple senses at once. The shifting light, the warmth on the skin, the sound of crackling, the smell of smoke, all created a powerful sensory environment. Some researchers suggest this multisensory experience had long-term effects on cognition, stimulating imagination, storytelling, and ritual. By altering the sensory world, fire reshaped perception itself. It gave humans a new relationship with night, not as helpless creatures in darkness, but as beings who could bend their environment to sight, warmth, and safety. Fire was not only a tool, it was a sensory revolution. For most of prehistory, daylight was the only time humans could act with confidence. Sunrise dictated work, movement, hunting, and gathering. Sunset ended everything. In the fireless world, the night belonged to predators and fear. But with fire, humans did not just gain light, they gained time. The simplest change was practical. Firelight extended visibility after dark, allowing people to continue tasks impossible in total darkness. Stone tools could be sharpened, hides scraped, and food prepared even when the sun had long set. What once had to be rushed before dusk could now be done calmly under the glow of flames. This efficiency reduced mistakes and increased survival, giving groups more control over their routines. But the impact went beyond productivity. Extra hours in the day meant extra opportunities for social interaction. Around fires, people shared meals, discussed plans, and exchanged information. This created the first structured evenings in human history. Time not consumed by survival alone, but by connection. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherers note that storytelling, music, and ritual often take place after dark, when daily work is done. Firelight may have sparked the same traditions in the deep past, offering the space where imagination and culture could grow. Fire also reshaped sleep. In the fireless age, humans relied on shallow, fragmented rest, waking often to guard against predators. With flames burning at the edge of camp, watch duties became easier, and groups could relax more deeply. The night was no longer a block of dread. It was divided into zones of safety, the circle of firelight where humans slept, and the darkness beyond where predators hesitated. This change likely improved health, recovery, and cognitive performance. Longer days also had evolutionary consequences. More waking hours created opportunities for teaching and learning. Skills like toolmaking or firekeeping could be passed on during quiet evenings, reinforcing cultural continuity. Some researchers argue that this evening space, safe, warm, and social, was the cradle of language complexity, myth-making, and cooperative planning. In firelight, humans did not just survive, they began to imagine. The psychological effects were profound. Firelight's flickering glow produces a calming effect on the nervous system, lowering stress and encouraging social closeness. Modern studies confirm that watching flames can reduce blood pressure and promote relaxation. For early humans, this meant evenings became a time of bonding rather than constant vigilance. Children fell asleep to the sound of crackling wood, elders shared memories, and adults forged trust through conversation. Most importantly, fire gave humans something no other species had: control over time itself. Other animals still bowed to the rhythm of day and night. Predators hunted in darkness, Prey grazed in daylight, and the cycle continued unchanged. Humans broke that cycle. With fire, they created a third space, the human night, a realm of activity and culture separate from both natural day and natural night. This extension of the day was not measured in hours alone, it was measured in possibilities. Firelight carved out new time for creativity, learning, and unity. It allowed humanity to step beyond the instincts of survival and begin the long journey towards civilization. When humans first gathered around fire, something new began to happen. For the first time in history, the night was no longer silent. In the glow of flames, voices rose not in warning or alarm, but in story. Fire did more than give warmth or protection. It created the stage for imagination. Archaeologists cannot dig up stories, but they can trace their origins through anthropology. Studies of modern hunter-gatherer societies show a striking pattern. During the day, conversations are practical, focused on survival, hunting strategies, gathering plans, resource sharing. But at night, when work ends and the fire burns, talk shifts. It becomes about memories, myths, and lessons. Many anthropologists believe this same shift occurred in deep prehistory. Fire freed human minds from constant vigilance, opening the door to reflection and narrative. Storytelling served more than entertainment. It was a way of teaching. Around the fire, elders could recount successful hunts, explain dangerous landscapes, or warn of predators through allegory. Children absorbed these lessons more effectively through narrative than through commands. Stories encoded survival strategies into memory, ensuring knowledge carried across generations. The firelight itself encouraged this process. Its flickering glow created atmosphere. Shadows dancing on cave walls, sparks rising into the night sky. This sensory environment made stories more immersive. Even today, people describe feeling hypnotized by flames. For early humans, this trance-like state may have deepened attention and memory, turning stories into powerful tools of cultural transmission. Imagination flourished. Freed from the limits of daylight, humans could speculate about the unseen, why the stars moved, why animals behaved as they did, what forces controlled storms or illness. These musings laid the groundwork for myth and spirituality. Fire did not just light the night, it lit the mind. Perhaps most importantly, storytelling created unity. A group that shared the same stories was more than individuals struggling together. They were a community bound by shared meaning. The fire was both literal and symbolic, a center of warmth, safety, and identity. The origins of epic myths, legends, and eventually written histories trace back to this moment. Without fire, humans might still have communicated, but it was fire that gave them the time, space, and atmosphere to turn communication into culture. Around the first hearths, humanity did not just eat and rest, it dreamed, and in those dreams, spoken aloud in firelight, civilization began. Fire was not only useful, it was extraordinary. To early humans, flames were unlike anything else in the natural world. They moved and breathed like a living creature, consuming wood, producing warmth, light, and sound. They could appear suddenly from the sky in a storm or erupt violently from the earth in a volcano. Fire seemed alive, powerful, and mysterious. It is no surprise that it became one of the first forces humans treated as sacred. Archaeological evidence hints at ritual use of fire tens of thousands of years ago. In caves across Europe, deep chambers with fire traces suggest that groups carried torches far into darkness, where no survival purpose existed. These spaces were used for symbolic activities, early art, carvings, or gatherings with meanings beyond daily life. Fire was the key that unlocked these inner sanctuaries, and its presence likely held spiritual weight. Ethnographic parallels strengthen this view. In hunter-gatherer societies studied today, fire often plays a central role in rituals, from initiation ceremonies to healing practices. The flame represents life, continuity, and a link to unseen powers. It is reasonable to believe our ancestors held similar associations. The act of keeping a fire alive may not only have been practical, but also sacred, a duty tied to the group's survival and identity. The symbolism of fire also arose from its duality. It gave life through warmth and cooking, yet it could also kill through burns and uncontrolled wildfires. This dual nature made fire a natural metaphor for power, balance, and respect. To mishandle it was dangerous, both physically and perhaps spiritually. Myths from cultures worldwide, from Prometheus in Greece to Agni in India, reflect this tension, portraying fire as a divine gift and a responsibility. Even in the earliest camps, rituals may have emerged around the hearth. Flames could mark the boundary between the safe, human-centered world and the dangerous dark wilderness. Singing, dancing, or simple gestures of gratitude may have reinforced the idea that fire was more than survival. It was connection to each other, to ancestors, and to forces beyond human control. The spiritual dimension of fire ensured it was never treated as ordinary. It was guarded, tended, and respected. Through ritual, fire became the first bridge between practical life and symbolic thought, a tool that was also a god, a necessity that was also a mystery. Once fire became part of human life, it stopped being just a tool. It became a symbol of control. A flame in the night was more than light. It was a declaration. This space is ours. In a fireless world, groups had little to defend themselves with. Predators could approach easily. Rival humans could drive them away from caves or waterholes. But with fire, everything changed. A hearth was both weapon and border. It marked territory in a way no stone or stick ever could. Predators avoided it, and other humans recognized it as a signal of occupation. To approach another group's fire was to cross into their power. Archaeological evidence from Middle Pleistocene sites shows repeated fire use in the same locations. Hearths appear layer after layer, suggesting that groups return to the same shelters again and again. Fire turned caves into long-term homes, not temporary stops. Whoever controlled the flame controlled the shelter. The struggle for fire may have fueled competition. Imagine two groups, one with fire burning at the cave's mouth, smoke rising into the night sky, the other shivering in the dark nearby. Which group would children gravitate toward? Which group would hunters choose to join? Fire wasn't just survival, it was magnetism. It drew people in, reinforced alliances, and gave leverage in disputes. There's reason to believe firekeeping became a form of authority. The person or family responsible for tending the flame held power, not because they were stronger, but because they safeguarded what everyone needed. If the fire died, the group risked hunger, cold, and predators. The flame was fragile, but its control made social standing solid. Fire also expanded the concept of territory itself. With portable embers, humans could move into harsher regions, carrying safety with them. Camps were no longer limited to mild climates or short seasons. This mobility gave fire users an advantage over those who had not yet mastered it. Groups without fire might have been forced to avoid firekeepers or to fight them for access. The political weight of fire echoes through later history. From sacred hearths in ancient temples to the Olympic flame, control of fire symbolized legitimacy and authority. These traditions did not appear suddenly. They are rooted in the Pleistocene, when the first sparks of power glowed in the dark. In this way, fire was not just survival, it was dominance. To hold fire was to hold territory, to command respect, to define who belonged inside the circle of light and who was left in the darkness beyond. For hundreds of thousands of years, human movement was limited by environment. Warm regions with mild winters offered food and shelter, but the cold, that was death. Before fire, ice and frost meant starvation and exposure. But with fire, humans broke the barrier. They became the only primates able to push into climates that once seemed uninhabitable. The archaeological record reflects this shift. Evidence of controlled fire coincides with human expansion into colder areas of Europe and Asia during the Middle Pleistocene. At sites like Beech's Pit in England, around 400,000 years ago, hearths appear alongside stone tools and butchered animal bones. These hearths weren't accidents. They were lifelines, making survival possible in regions that would have frozen unprotected bodies within hours. Fire allowed humans to master warmth in two ways: direct heat and indirect adaptation. Directly, it let groups survive icy nights, snow, and winds that would have killed them otherwise. Indirectly, it made new materials usable. Animal hides softened by fire scraping became clothing. Bones and sinews treated with heat were fashioned into tools. Fire expanded not only where humans could live, but what they could create to thrive there. Migration wasn't only about cold. Firelight also provided safety in unfamiliar environments. Moving into new territories meant new predators, new landscapes, and new risks. Carrying embers meant carrying protection. A flame at night transformed strange ground into temporary home. The ability to colonize colder zones gave fire users a decisive edge. Groups without fire remained confined to warmer climates, competing over the same resources. Those with fire spread out, reducing competition and finding new food sources. This expansion laid the groundwork for humanity's eventual global reach. By the time Homo sapiens began their great migrations out of Africa, fire was not optional. It was essential baggage. There was also a psychological shift. Fire gave confidence. No longer did humans need to fear every storm or icy wind. They had a tool that pushed back against the environment itself. This sense of control encouraged exploration, risk-taking, and innovation. The courage to migrate into the unknown was fueled by the steady glow of flames. Later myths often describe fire as a gift that separated humans from animals. In practical terms, this was true. Lions, bears, and hyenas could dominate the warm savannas. But in frozen landscapes, in mountains and tundras, only humans could endure. Fire carved humanity a place where no other predator could follow. By extending the day and extending the map, fire expanded the human world. What began as a fragile ember carried in cupped hands became the passport that allowed our species to step out of Africa, cross continents, and eventually encircle the globe. Fire has been part of Earth for hundreds of millions of years. Lightning, volcanoes, and wildfires existed long before humans. Yet no other animal ever learned to master it. Lions feared it, elephants avoided it, and even intelligent species like chimpanzees or dolphins never attempted to control it. Why was fire an exclusively human achievement? The first reason is biology. Most animals are instinctively afraid of flames. Fire moves unpredictably, producing heat, light, and sound. To approach it is dangerous, and natural selection rewarded caution. Even today, chimpanzees and gorillas observe wildfires from a distance but rarely get close. Humans uniquely overcame this fear. Curiosity balanced the instinct to flee. The second reason is manipulation of objects. Fire requires fuel. To maintain it, one must gather wood, tend coals, or shield flames from wind. Humans had the dexterity to handle sticks, stones, and tinder with precision. Other animals, despite intelligence, lacked the fine motor skills to manage fire safely. Third, cognition played a decisive role. Firekeeping demands foresight. A flame must be fed regularly. Embers must be protected for future use. This requires planning and patience, qualities rare outside the human lineage. While ravens can store food and dolphins can cooperate, the abstract thinking needed to preserve an invisible resource like heat was beyond them. Finally, culture sealed the difference. Fire knowledge had to be shared. One person discovering how to nurture embers was useless unless others copied and transmitted the skill. Humans excelled at imitation and teaching. In this way, fire knowledge spread across groups and generations, something no other species achieved. This unique combination, curiosity to approach fire, hands to manage it, brains to plan for it, and culture to share it, made humans alone the masters of flame. The result was a divide that shaped history. While all animals continued to adapt passively to their environments, humans rewrote the rules. Fire turned the fearful, vulnerable primate into a force able to challenge predators, climates, and landscapes. Other species saw fire, only humans owned it. The Neanderthals, our closest evolutionary cousins, lived across Europe and Western Asia for over 300,000 years. Their survival in cold Ice Age environments would have been impossible without fire. Archaeological evidence shows that Neanderthals were skilled fire users, though perhaps not always fire makers. Sites across Europe, from France to Croatia, reveal repeated use of hearths in caves and open-air camps. Burned bones, charred flint tools, and layers of ash tell the story of regular fire activity. At Grotte du Renne in France, hearths appear in multiple layers of occupation, suggesting that Neanderthals maintained fire over generations. In Shanidar Cave in Iraq, traces of controlled fire lie alongside evidence of burials and symbolic behavior, reinforcing fire's central role in Neanderthal life. Fire allowed Neanderthals to endure brutal winters. They roasted meat, making it safer and easier to digest. They heated shelters, dried hides, and hardened wooden tools in flames. Chemical analysis of ash deposits shows repeated burning of specific wood types, hinting that they chose fuel deliberately, a sign of planning, not accident. But questions remain about whether Neanderthals could consistently create fire or only preserved it once obtained. Some researchers argue that Neanderthals lacked reliable fire-starting techniques, relying instead on natural sources like lightning or wildfires. Others point to specialized flint tools that may have been used as fire strikers. The debate continues, but what is clear is that Neanderthals understood fire's value and wove it into their survival strategies. Beyond the practical, fire-shaped Neanderthal social life, hearths served as gathering points, much like with Homo sapiens. Around flames, families prepared food, cared for children, and likely told stories or performed rituals. Firelight provided not only safety but intimacy, a circle of warmth in an otherwise hostile Ice Age landscape. Yet, unlike Homo sapiens, Neanderthals eventually vanished. Did fire play a role in this divergence? Possibly. Homo sapiens may have developed more advanced techniques for fire production, giving them greater independence and resilience. If Neanderthals depended more heavily on natural fire sources, they may have been at a disadvantage during long cold periods when lightning or wildfires were scarce. Still, the legacy of Neanderthal fire use is profound. They were not primitive brutes, but skilled survivors who harnessed one of nature's most powerful forces. The glow of their hearths lit Ice Age caves for hundreds of thousands of years, and though their species is gone, their mastery of fire reminds us how close they came to sharing our destiny. Homo erectus and Homo sapiens stand as two of the most important chapters in the human story. Both used fire, but how they approached it, and how far they took its potential, reveals why one species endured for nearly 2 million years while the other came to dominate the planet. Homo erectus, appearing about 1.8 million years ago, is often credited as the first hominin to use fire regularly. Evidence from sites like Wonderwork Cave in South Africa shows burned bones and ash dating to nearly 1 million years ago, strongly suggesting deliberate use. Fire gave Homo erectus a new level of adaptability. It allowed them to migrate out of Africa into Eurasia, enduring colder climates and new environments. Cooking softened food, releasing calories that supported their expanding brains and bodies. Fire also likely served as protection from predators, enabling erectus to sleep more securely. But their relationship with fire appears more limited compared to ours. Archaeological traces suggest they used fire, but perhaps did not master reliable fire-starting techniques. Their hearths were simpler, less frequent, and sometimes absent in areas where fire should have been essential. This raises the possibility that Homo erectus relied on opportunistic fire use, capturing flames when nature provided them, rather than producing them independently. Even so, their survival for nearly 2 million years demonstrates that this strategy worked, but it may also have set boundaries on how far they could innovate. Homo sapiens, by contrast, took fire to another level. By the time our species emerged around 300,000 years ago, fire use was consistent, deliberate, and versatile. We not only preserved and used fire, but developed specialized techniques to create it at will. Flint and pyrite striking, friction-based methods, and carefully chosen tinder gave us independence from nature's chance events. Our species also exploited fire in broader ways. Hearths became centers of culture, places for storytelling, rituals, and teaching. Fire was used strategically for landscape management, with evidence of early humans setting controlled burns to drive game or encourage plant growth. In colder regions, sapiens used fire not just for warmth, but for clothing production, hide treatment, and eventually ceramic and metal technologies. The cognitive leap is clear. While Homo erectus used fire for survival, Homo sapiens turned it into a foundation for innovation. We expanded its role from cooking and warmth into technology, culture, and even symbolism. Fire became part of our identity, the boundary line between wilderness and human space. This difference may explain why one species remained limited while the other conquered the globe. Fire gave Homo erectus the ability to spread. Fire gave Homo sapiens the ability to transform. When humans first mastered fire, they did more than tame an element. They took the first true step into technology. Fire was not just another tool like a stone flake or wooden spear. It was a process, a force that transformed everything it touched. And once humans learned to control it, the path toward every later innovation opened. At its simplest, fire was a machine of change. It turned raw meat into cooked food, tough roots into digestible starch, cold nights into warmth, and predator-filled darkness into safety. No other species had discovered a way to use energy outside its own muscles. With fire, humans did not just endure their environment, they reshaped it. The leap was profound because fire was scalable. A stone axe could cut one tree at a time. Fire could clear entire landscapes. Archaeologists see evidence of controlled burns tens of thousands of years ago, used to flush game, renew vegetation, or manage territory. These early forms of fire management foreshadowed agriculture itself, the deliberate shaping of ecosystems. Fire also enabled materials science in its earliest form. Heating stones made them easier to shape into sharper tools. Exposing certain clays to flame hardened them, paving the way for pottery. Later, fire would melt metal ores, unlocking the Bronze and Iron Ages. All of this began with the discovery that heat itself could alter matter. Equally important was the mindset fire encouraged. Mastering it required foresight, gathering wood, protecting embers, tending flames through the night. This fostered habits of planning and cooperation, skills that would underpin every future technology. In a sense, fire was humanity's first laboratory. Every flame was an experiment, teaching lessons about heat, fuel, and transformation. From a survival tool, fire became a foundation. It was the first technology that reached beyond immediate use, shaping landscapes, societies, and futures. Without it, there would be no metallurgy, no pottery, no engines, no electricity. Every spark of innovation that came later can trace its ancestry back to the first spark struck between stone and pyrite. Fire was not just the first tool, it was the birth of technology itself. The hearth was humanity's first workshop. What began as a circle of stones for warmth and cooking slowly became a place of experimentation. Once humans realized fire could transform food, they discovered it could transform matter as well. That realization carried them from survival into technology, from hearth to forge. The earliest discoveries were simple but revolutionary. Heating stones caused them to fracture in predictable ways, producing sharper flakes for tools. Archaeologists have found fire-hardened wooden spears dating back at least 300,000 years, their tips charred to make them stronger and more durable. These were small steps, but they showed that fire was more than comfort. It was a toolmaker. By around 30,000 years ago, humans were using fire to bake clay into figurines. Later, pottery emerged as one of the most important technologies of the Neolithic era, allowing food storage and cooking on a scale never seen before. Without fire, there would be no ceramics, no containers, no permanent villages. The next leap was metallurgy. Around 6,000 years ago, humans began using fire to smelt copper, turning stone ores into liquid metal. This led to the Bronze Age, when copper mixed with tin created harder, sharper tools and weapons. Eventually, fire's reach expanded into the Iron Age, unlocking the strongest material yet known. Each stage was a direct continuation of that first mastery of flame in the Pleistocene. The forge also reshaped society. Controlling fire at high temperatures required skill, resources, and organization. Metallurgy created specialists, smiths, whose knowledge gave them prestige and power. Fire was no longer just communal survival. It became the basis of trade, warfare, and civilization itself. The Industrial Revolution of much later history, coal furnaces, steam engines, electricity, was simply the logical endpoint of this trajectory. Once humans learned to bend fire for heat, they eventually learned to bend it for energy. The path is clear. The small hearth of our ancestors was the seed. Every furnace, kiln, and engine is its descendant. Fire carried humanity from the darkness of caves to the brilliance of cities, from survival to mastery. The forge was not a new invention. It was the hearth evolved. To understand what fire gave us, we need to remember the world before it. Nights were endless. Cold seeped into bones with no relief. Predators owned the dark, and humans were little more than cautious visitors in a world of claws and teeth. Hunger was constant, limited by what raw food the body could process. Survival was fragile, dependent entirely on nature's mercy. Fire changed that equation forever. Suddenly humans no longer waited helplessly for daylight. A flame turned night into usable hours. Work, conversation, planning, and ritual could extend beyond sunset. The world shrank to a circle of light where humans, for the first time, felt at the centre of their environment rather than its victims. It also transformed fear, where once every shadow carried threat, now predators hesitated. The glow of fire was a boundary line, not just of safety, but of confidence. Humans could sleep more deeply, raise children with less fear, and dream with fewer interruptions. Fire created psychological space. It was not only a weapon against cold or beasts, but against anxiety itself. Food, too, was revolutionized. Cooking unlocked nutrients, reduced disease, and made diets richer and more varied. What had once been tough or inedible became soft, nourishing, and safe. Fire widened the menu of survival, fueling larger brains and longer lives. Looking back, the contrast is staggering. Before fire, humanity was a fragile species clinging to the edges of survival. After fire, humanity began a climb that would never stop, into new climates, new technologies, and new forms of society. Fire did not just warm bodies, it rewired destiny. This is why every great myth treats fire as a gift stolen from gods, a treasure too powerful to belong to mortals. Our ancestors knew what we sometimes forget. Without fire, we would not be here. Every match struck, every spark from a lighter, every glowing light bulb traces back to that first ember cradled in human hands. We escaped the world of cold, fear, and helplessness. Fire was the door, and once we stepped through it, there was no going back. If we trace humanity's story back far enough, past the rise of agriculture, past the first cities, even past the earliest stone tools, one moment stands out above all others: the moment we claimed fire. It was not invention in the modern sense. It was discovery, courage, and persistence combined. But it was also the spark that made everything else possible. Fire was the great divider. With it, humans separated themselves from the rest of the animal world. Lions had strength, eagles had vision, wolves had unity, but none of them could command flame. That ability gave humans not just a survival edge, but a psychological one. They could shape their surroundings rather than bend to them. They could imagine a future and prepare for it. Fire was the first mirror of intelligence. From there, the path unfolded. Fire allowed us to cook, to migrate, to settle, to forge. It turned caves into homes and wild landscapes into managed environments. It was the reason our ancestors could push into ice and tundra, and later why they could smelt metal, build engines, and eventually harness electricity. Each step along that road, from embers to nuclear fire, is part of the same continuum. But there is another truth often overlooked. Fire also taught us responsibility. A flame untended dies. A flame uncontrolled destroys. For early humans, fire was fragile, demanding care, planning, and cooperation. In that sense, it did not only give us technology, it gave us society. Keeping a fire alive required trust in one another, a shared duty. Out of that duty, culture was born. Looking back, the world before fire seems almost alien, a species huddled in darkness, vulnerable, ruled by the rhythms of nature. The world after fire is our world, one of ambition, expansion, and endless transformation. That transition is the most profound revolution in our history. Even now, when we light a candle or watch flames in a fireplace, we're repeating an act that defined our species. The glow reaches across millennia, connecting us to those first humans who dared to hold fire in their hands. They may not have known what they had begun, but we live every day in the shadow and the light of their discovery. The first spark was more than survival. It was the beginning of humanity.